So during the holidays, we had some time to do a bigger battle than normal. So this is a battle that we took the entire day for. So it's 10k of Dread Elves versus Highborn Elves. And you can see the lists on this shot. So they have not been typed out because it was honestly just too much effort. So I hope that the writing is good enough for you guys. So with my opponent, I agreed to make this a bit of a push scenario. So we would roll off who is going to try to push through the opposing forces, and the opposing forces the defenders were going to be spread out over the table. So we are going to play over the entire length of a table, and then the defender has to deploy like roughly 2,500 points in each quarter of the table, and just have to prevent the attacker from bursting through. So here we have some army picks. As you might know by now, I'm still in full progress of repainting my Dread Elves. So yeah, there's just a couple of choices in there that still have to be repainted. And we also have a shot of the spread out Highborn Elf forces. And then for the rest, we will just see it from the top. So this was a bit more of a casual game, as you might imagine. So the Dread Elves, they are all the way on the left of the field, but currently you cannot see them yet. And the High Elf forces, they were deployed in 4 quarters, so you can see just the division of the entire High Elf army into spare parts. So yeah, one by one you can see the units of the Dread Elves pop onto the table. So the goal of the Dread Elves, before we started this, I wrote out a little scenario where the Dread Elves had to come into certain zones where the High Elves have deployed. Like if I do make it all the way to the right zone, for every unit I get there, I get a +2 on the final outcome of the battle. And for each unit that goes into the zone left of that, just +1. Each unit that ends up at the end of the battle in the middle is a +0. And then for the first zone, if there's any units left there, -1. And for any units left either in the space between the armies or in my deployment zone, I would get a -2. I thought this was quite a nice concept, and yeah, it might work, but we will see what's gonna happen in this game. So obviously the tactics are gonna be a little bit more constrained, as we're just playing with 10,000 points over the length of the game board. So basically for the Dread Elves the only option is to just move forward, and for the High Elves to try to rush towards the Dread Elf lines and keep them back as much as possible. So what do we see on table here? So in the left, in the middle, you can see my Cauldron of Blood with Blades of Nab. On top from there, between the ruins and this unit, is a unit of Dread Judges. Then in the ruins are 2 chariots, one hunting chariot and a raptor chariot. And on the bottom you can already see the Dread Judges also all the way on the bottom. My opponent charged into my Dread Judges. This unit contains my general with multiple wounds too. So his thinking was that if he was able to knock out this model at the start of the game, it would be highly advantageous to him. So he charged in with some Knights of Rima that I had put a minimized roll on with Truth of Time, just to hope that maybe they wouldn't make it in, and then yeah, I could just kill the character with my Dread Judges. But they still both made it in, but fortunately when we went to combat he did 2 wounds on my general, but then the general managed to kill his Griffin character. Yeah, it's really a sturdy character, this guy, with 4 attacks, with hatred, with strength 7, with reroll 1s to wound. Well, in this case he doesn't have the reroll 1s to wound. It's only if you have the Cult Priest also in the unit. But he's still very sturdy and he puts out a lot of damage. Yeah. So what else? I have to do 2 units of Dark Acolytes in the middle. Well, I used to have them. So 1 unit panicked away. I don't remember any. I believe just from the combat, because the other unit got destroyed in combat by the combination of a chariot and a unit of spear elves. Yeah, you might see the camera move a little bit from time to time, just because we had to use a bit of an improvised setup. So there we go again. That's me just trying to adjust the camera to get a better view angle for the rest of the game. Yeah, so my opponent charged in with the spear elf, so he overrun. I was just trying to bait him towards my line with the Dark Acolytes, because I figured that the more I could compart up his army, the more I would benefit from it, as it would mean that I wouldn't have to deal with all of it at the same time. Yeah, and then also if anything happened, so first turn I did some damage onto one of his chariots, and then when he did the overrun, he came into the forest. He suffered a wound on a chariot that had already taken some wounds. So the unit didn't start with just a single model. So because of that, if you lose a quarter of or more of the health points of the health pool, you have to take a panic test. The chariot took a panic test and actually fled away from my lines because of the dangerous terrain. So that was funny. So this is my second turn that I'm pushing up, and I'm definitely not pushing up as fast as I had wanted. Yeah, so my dread judges, they had some troubles with removing the Knights of Rima. So the Knights of Rima, they did kill off like 10 or 12 dread judges, which was really a lot. Basically, they hit all of their attacks and also wounded all of them. Yeah, so the rest of the line is kind of queuing up behind these dread judges at the bottom, and I try to seep through with, for example, my Kraken, who's now in the forest. But my opponent also has some good anti-monster tools in his army, notably the 2 commanders on lion chariots. So we had this discussion a couple of times now. Like high elves or highborn elves, they do struggle a bit with monsters in general, because they're quite good at killing infantry, but monsters, they tend to be a bit annoying. So you have either the bolt throwers for that, but at 180 points each, they don't really do a lot of damage if they don't get to fire the entire game, and they're quite vulnerable with only 4 wounds at resistance or resilience 4. So the other alternatives are a unit of Lion Guard, either skirmishing or not. Usually this, people like to play them with a prince just to make them stubborn, which is fair enough. I could still imagine a unit of 10 Lion Guard being useful just to hand down some monsters, but then again they are going to be quite slow. And if the monster strikes first, then your Lion Guard are gonna suffer probably. And also Lion Guard, they if they don't get their nice matchup, then they kind of get outperformed by other units. So we discussed this option of having a commander on the Lion Chariot, because the Lion Chariot on its own is possibly just not enough to get rid of most monsters. By putting on a character on there, you get 2 extra attacks. You get the option of giving it flaming attacks. You get the option of going to offensive 8 with supernatural dexterity. So you hit on 2s instead of on 3s. And that really makes a difference, because also now you have 1 model. So if you compare it to 2 Lion Chariots that you want to charge in, that might be cheaper or same price. Now in this case, you can try to charge. If you fail, then you don't have just 1 chariot in there that's going to die. And also, if your opponent with a monster decides to charge you, you still have these attacks of the guy on top that put out a lot of hurt. So like the impact hits are not necessarily the most influential part of this model anymore. Anyway, so what is happening? So my opponent is setting up a little bit of a trap. He actually managed to converge his lines very effectively, way more effectively than I did. Because I'm playing with a more chunky block, so I'm also not very good at lateral movement in this list. So I figured that if I charged into the spearman in the middle with my Blades of Nap, I would probably kill them, but then be stuck there and get flank charges all over. So I had Truth of Time on this unit, so I figured that I could go for the charge with Swift Stride onto the the swordsman on the top, because my flank there was a little bit outnumbered, but if I had the Blades of Nap there, I could just push through and my opponent's line would be just completely misaligned basically. I did need a 12 for this, but I had a triple maximized roll, so I rolled 5 dice and I took the 2 highest. Unfortunately I didn't make it. I did get a 6, and that opened up my flank to my opponent's dragon also. So this is his dragon mage. So I was not really thrilled about this. But yeah, if it was one of these situations where if you go for it and you manage it, then it's going to be really influential in the game. If you don't, well, the current board state is anyway such that this unit of Blades of Nab would get grinded down by the opposing forces where they are. So otherwise, on the bottom, the Dread Judges, they did manage to kill off the remaining Knights of Rima, but yeah, it just had been my turn. You can still see that I was just quite clogged up with my units, and also I have this problem now that there's this Lion Chariot character on the bottom. If I go forward with my Dread Knights, they're gonna take a lot of damage, or just damage that is not really necessary, but maybe I should have pushed there. But off screen, behind the Dread Knights, there's still another block of 50 Legionnaires also, so probably I should have pushed. So now my opponent is gonna enable some countermeasures to my play. So I was actually not really sad about this. You can see him putting the Eline Reavers to block my charge lanes, but I think this was a bit of a misplay, because this is just for me a screen right now towards which I can advance if I give him poor charges with the Eline Reavers or no charges at all. So this basically means that the Dread Knights can advance up to the point where they are nearly touching the Eline Reavers. And then next turn I can try to charge with the Kraken on the Reavers, force a panic check. And if he panics away, I get a free charge anywhere with my Dread Knight. So I was quite pleased about this actually. Then we go into the combat. So, well, when I say the combat, I mean the combat between the Blades of Nab and one unit of Spear Elves, one Fire Phoenix, and his Dragon Mage. I did try to tempt him to challenge out his Dragon Mage with my champion in my Blades of Nab, but he didn't want any of that because he still had a Spear Elf champion, so that was too bad. Yeah, so we roll a lot of dice, and my opponent does a lot of damage. I do a lot of damage. So as you can see, the Spear Elves are only touching like half of the unit of Blades of Nab. But still I managed to do a total of 20 wounds to the unit, so I completely obliterate the unit. And to the Fire Phoenix I do also something like 3 wounds. Yeah, so this is with the Cauldron with Moriak's Reaping on top with a Cult Priest, so he has 4 attacks effectively at strength 5. Another 4 attacks at strength 5 of the statue, then 6 attacks at strength 3 with +1 to wound. Of the disciples near the cauldron, and then all the Blades of Nab, they also get to attack. So there's a lot of damage coming out of these out of this unit at least. But then again, they also die like flies. So it used to be a unit of 30 models. My opponent managed to bring them down to 10 models. Um, so I believe my opponent lost this combat. But anyway, his Dragon Mage sticked, or it was a draw. I think it was a draw. Yeah, otherwise, my Hydra has not a lot of other choices than to charge into his Phoenix card, his Flame Wardens, and I was just hoping for an unlucky roll on his side, maybe just failing a Steadfast roll, because I'm not sure. I believe he was out of general range, but I don't remember. So I was just hoping for a failed break test, because maybe it happens, you know. Because together with the breath attack and the attacks and the stomp, I should be able to do some damage. And in the end, I don't do a lot of damage. So I kill a couple, but it's not enough to make my opponent even take a break test, I think. So that was a big shame. So you can see on the bottom how I treated this. So basically we just have a reshuffling of the units. I also have a Hydra who is on the hill there, just to threaten my opponent a bit more. And yeah, this play of him where he put the Lean Reavers in the spot where they are allows him allows me to move up basically. So in the magic phase I did cast the +1 strength, +1 AP onto my Dread Knights just to discourage him from charging in with any of his units that could possibly do so. And then for the next turn, it's actually quite okay what I have. So I can charge into his Reavers, and then I will have an overrun into some Lancers. And then I still have a Raptor Chariot that can overrun into his Dragon Mage. My Spear Elves can go into his Spear Elves. So on the bottom it looks kind of okay, until you look at the part that's a little bit more to the right. Because there's a lot of stuff there that I not necessarily would want to face. And on top of the screen, I would say that things are going quite bad for me. So I do manage to kill a lot of stuff. I do manage to do a lot of damage there. But my opponent just has the models to cope with it and be alright. So right now my Golden, my Divine Altar is up against a unit of Lion Guard. The Lion Guard do have the ranks, they do have a banner and combat res. So I believe this turn I still stick because I still had some Witch Elves that could take some damage. But next turn it's most likely gonna run away. Yeah, and the Hydra got killed by one of these chariot characters, and on top I still have a unit of Dread Judges that left the table the previous turn, and I have a chariot there, but my opponent has so many units that he can just double flee and not care about it. And then once my unit of Dread Judges comes onto the table, he can charge me with the Spear Elves who can strike at the same time and actually are quite good at eliminating models such as Dread Judges. Yeah, so then we go to my turn. We go for the charge into the Reavers. And yeah, I would say personally that this was the point where I realized that it was not gonna happen for me, or I was not gonna manage to push through. So had I specifically tailored my list for this scenario, then I would have put in also some ball throwers, because the nature of the game that we're playing kind of dictates that you're playing a lot of turns, and the stuff that's happening in the backfield is kind of immune to what is happening at the front lines. So having some ball throwers would definitely help against the dragon, against the chariots, these line chariot characters. I did have 2 hunting chariots, but they're not reliable enough. They don't have the range that you need. and you're in your own way all the time. So yeah, then we go to combat. So here my opponent is really lucky. So I don't exactly remember what I did, but I managed to make him flee with his character on dragon. Um, and that actually meant that his character was safe once again. I don't remember. I believe at this point he also had 3 wounds on this on his dragon mage. So I don't remember actually if he also rallied on minimized or half leadership. But it was really a lucky getaway for my opponent. So you can see on the bottom that I have my Manticore Dread Prince there. He had Transcendence, he went into the Highborn Lances. But he just managed to do 1 wound, which was very disappointing because I had imagined that he would go in, he would do at least 2 wounds, he would go up to the strength 6 that he needs in order to be threatening enough for my opponent's knights. And then when my opponent would charge him, I could just stick and maybe survive on a single wound, or maybe even 2. But in this situation, with only strength 5, AP2, I don't have the power that I need to be able to kill off my opponent. So yeah, that is really annoying. Yeah, so otherwise, yeah, basically was just starting with the cleanup of my army at this point. My opponent is also lacking in terms of stuff he still has on the table, that's for sure. But he still also has his elf prince in the line guard in the top left by now. He still has some spear elves, some swordmaster darts, his dragon mage, phoenix. There's just a lot of stuff that either broke from combat and rallied, or came back in another way, or just some reinforcements. And yeah, and in some way he had them and I didn't. But in all, it was for sure a nice game to just play for once. So once again, I'm sorry about the camera just tilting off screen a little bit from time to time, but yeah, this is what we got. Yeah, so this scenario, all in all, didn't really turn out in the way that I had thought it would. Just because stalling in 9 days is quite effective if you field so much points. So for example, I had this Dread Prince on Manticore, and he can fly 18 inches, I believe, but that was just not enough to come anywhere near going beyond my opponent's lines, or in a safe spot where he could go over next turn. So we also considered the terrain in this regard. So we only have one house in the middle of the table and no other impossible or building terrain pieces on board, just to keep a bit more space. But such a character like Dread Prince on Manticore in an offensive matchup doesn't really work on this type of format. Like if my opponent had to attack, his mage would also have been quite useless, I think. Because then you can play very defensively with the hunting chariots, so you can keep them behind some hills, behind some buildings, and just pop them out whenever your opponent's dragon comes close. And then if you can zero in 2 of them at the same target, then yeah, that's gonna hurt. Yeah, so what are we doing now? My opponent is basically just cleaning up my lines. So my Dread Prince on Manticore completely fluffed again, and then my opponent's Knights of Rima just had an overrun into my Dread Knights, I believe, that are just a little bit off screen right now. This does give me a counter charge with my Dread Legionnaires into his flank, so I am gonna win the grind at least. Yeah, there they go. But the Dread Knights, I believe I still had a couple of Dread Knights left. But yeah, the board state is such that my opponent is going to be able to keep me from getting into his back field, basically. So what do I still have left? I still have a big block of Dread Legionnaires in the field. I still have a big block of Dread Legionnaires off camera on the bottom of the woods. I still have, I believe, 2 of my mages, a unit of Corsairs behind the building, Raptor Chariot, a hunting chariot that's being charged by a chariot right now, and that's about it. So yeah, here we recenter, and here you can see it again. So I do still have my Dread Knights also, and they actually charged into the Highborn Lancers of my opponent. But then again, what does my opponent still have? He has 2 chariots on the right. He has a phoenix on top, above his magic cards. He still has a unit of swordmasters, his mage on dragon, his 1 character on chariot by now, I believe. His 3 bolters, his phoenix guard, his line guard, another phoenix. 2 units of Grey Watchers that are so incredibly annoying. And that's about it. But yeah, these are all just pieces that are still quite capable of competing with what I have on the table. So yeah, the outcome is definitely going to be that my opponent is going to win this one. So had the tables been turned and had my opponent been the attacker, he also admitted that he would have had a lot of trouble because I had quite a lot of units that were just going to be too sturdy for him. So like these 2 units of 50 Legionnaires, if I had just put them in front and allowed my opponent to charge into them, I would have struck first, which was going to be a big problem for him, especially because he has a lot of squishy models in there. Sure, he can charge in with the chariots, but that's also like a one-time thing, and if he does that, I'm still going to be steadfast. So I'm going to grind them down. So he only has the impact hits really. So that's, yeah, he had 2 units of those. I believe I had 2 units of Legionnaires, so that's going to be 3d6 strength 5 on each unit, which is going to hurt. It's going to be like 10 wounds or so. But after that you still have 40 Spear Elves left. So you do put a dent in the unit, but not as much as you would hope, especially with chariots. You just would like to go through and through in one go. Because if these guys with 40 guys left in horde formation would strike back, you got actually the 32 attacks if you're 8 wide. So 32 attacks, you hit on a 3+ with hatred, because it's actually a Cult of Nab theme army, what I was fielding. So 3+ with hatred, so that's like 30 hits. You have 5s to wound, so that's like 10 wounds onto the chariots, and then the chariots are actually gone before they get the strike. So they only get the impact hits. Normally. Yeah, so we still roll out a little bit more. My opponent is able to decimate my 1 unit of Legionnaires through a combination of magic and shooting. So they just consolidate their position and reform, and now finally you can see the other unit of Legionnaires entering the field. So they had already been on the board the entire game, but they didn't really do anything so far. So yeah, it would definitely have been better to, for example, replace that unit with 3 units of bolt throwers. Yeah, so all in all, fun game to do. Fun game to do at least once, also for anyone who's interested to do it themselves. And I think the scenario itself is also quite funny. It might be better if you tailor it really to attacker and defender. And I don't know if it's always going to be extremely hard for the attacker. But yeah, it seems like it. Like you could do the same thing with a Helmor and then just put a portal behind your opponent and then just walk on from there. That would be way more easier, but yeah, that would also be a little bit against the idea of the entire concept. I hope you enjoyed this one, and see you next time.